Look at this ring, everyone. It is a tiny, 3/4 carat speck of dust, which makes sense because my sister has always been satisfied with leftovers and second place. But tonight I need your attention on something that actually matters, because I am carrying the true future of this family's legacy. Those were the exact words my older sister, Chloe, projected into the sterling silver microphone at the crest of the Rosewood Country Club ballroom. There were 150 guests in attendance, sitting at 15 circular tables covered in ivory damask, holding glasses of chilled Roederer estate champagne. My name is Maya Lin. I am 26 years old, and this is the story of how my sister and my parents tried to turn my engagement announcement into a public execution of my worth, only to discover that the quiet foundation they spent my entire life undermining had been reinforced by a multi-million-dollar reality they could not touch. Today, Chloe lives in a rented 2-bedroom apartment over a dry cleaner's shop, while the 500-acre estate she believed was her birthright belongs completely to me. Secured by a man who kept his silence until the perfect moment to speak arrived. To understand the weight of that microphone cord in Chloe's manicured hand, you must understand the architecture of our life in Crestview Hills. We grew up in a 6,000-square-foot brick Georgian manor on Stonecrop Ridge. The house smelled permanently of dried eucalyptus and French oil soap, a clean, sterile fragrance that concealed a rigidly maintained human ledger. My father, Richard Lin, was a senior partner at a corporate maritime firm, earning a salary of $480,000 a year. My mother, Eleanor, was a woman who lived by the social register, measuring the value of her days by the caliber of the invitations on our limestone foyer console. In our family, there was an absolute hierarchy, a ranking system as visible as the gold leaf on our dining room mirror. Chloe was the crown jewel. She was 2 years older, taller, blonde by appointment, and possessed the sharp, effortless arrogance that my parents mistook for leadership. She received a $2,500 monthly allowance throughout her time at a boutique liberal arts college, a car with a leather-wrapped steering wheel for her 16th birthday, and the unconditional validation of our mother's constant praise. I was the baseline. I was the dark-haired, quiet daughter who studied logistics, worked 40 hours a week at the university library to pay for my own textbooks, and kept my bedroom door shut. My allowance was exactly $0 once I turned 18. My father told me it would build resilience. What it built was an acute understanding of structural isolation. The primary authority behind our family's wealth did not live on Stonecrop Ridge. It belonged to my grandfather, Arthur Lin. Arthur was an 88-year-old self-made industrialist who founded Lin Shipping Logistics in 1965. He lived alone on a massive 500-acre coastal estate in Maine, surrounded by old pine trees and the smell of salt water. He was a silent, imposing presence who wore tweed jackets that smelled of pipe tobacco and peppermint drops. He rarely attended my mother's dinner parties, preferring the cold wind of the coast to the air-conditioned gossip of Crestview Hills. My parents feared him because he controlled the family trust, an estate valued at approximately $42 million. Chloe spent her life performing for him, sending handwritten notes on heavy cream stationery and tracking his birthday with military precision. I simply visited him every third weekend of the month, driving my rusted 2012 compact sedan 4 hours north. We would sit on his porch in green wicker chairs, drinking black tea from heavy ceramic mugs, watching the tide come in against the dark rocks. We rarely spoke about the family. We spoke about shipping routes, dry dock capacities, and the cost of sulfur-grade steel. He would look at my notebook, tap his thick thumb against his silver pocket watch, and say, "The world is run by the people who move the cargo, Maya, not the people who decorate the captain's cabin." I didn't realize until much later that he was auditing me, line by line, year after year. The slights in my parents' home accumulated with a steady, rhythmic friction, escalating as we grew into adulthood. The first specific scene that established the depth of the divide occurred when I was 22, during Chloe's 24th birthday dinner at the Hunt Room restaurant. There were 20 guests present, seated along a long oak table beneath oil paintings of hunting hounds. I had just graduated from my master's program in supply chain management with a perfect 4.0 grade point average. When my grandfather asked about my future plans across the table, I began to explain a job offer I had received from a national port authority. My mother interrupted me, her silver fork tapping against her crystal water glass. "Maya, let's not bore your grandfather with logistics schedules during Chloe's celebration. Chloe has just been accepted onto the junior committee for the Botanical Gardens Gala, which requires real social execution." Chloe leaned back, smoothing her silk blouse, and smiled at me. "It's fine, Mother. Maya needs her little numbers to feel useful. We can't all be suited for the public eye." I sat perfectly still. The waiter placed a plate of seared venison in front of me. The meat smelled of rosemary and charcoal. I picked up my knife, made a clean, precise cut through the steak, and said, "The Port Authority manages 12 million tons of cargo a year, Chloe. It is very useful." I did not look at my mother's frown or my sister's smirk for the rest of the evening. The second major incident took place 2 years later, in the winter of 2024, during our family's annual Christmas Eve gathering. The living room was lit by a 12-foot spruce tree decorated with 300 identical silver glass ornaments. My boyfriend, David, had joined us for the first time. David was an industrial engineer at a local manufacturing plant, a quiet, brilliant man from a working-class background who wore a neat but inexpensive wool suit. When my father asked David about his family, David explained that his father was a retired machinist who had worked 35 years at the same tool and die shop. My father set his crystal tumbler of scotch down on the soapstone mantelpiece with a sharp click. "An honorable trade, David. Of course, in our circle, we tend to deal with the people who own the factories, not the people who service the lathes. It's a matter of scope." Chloe laughed from the sofa, where she sat with her legs crossed, a diamond tennis bracelet glittering on her wrist. "Don't scare him, Father. David is just perfect for Maya. She's always had a fondness for project pieces." I felt David's hand tighten slightly against his knee beneath the tablecloth. I reached over, placed my hand over his fingers, and felt the rough texture of his skin. I looked directly at my father and said, "David's scope includes a patent on a hydraulic valve that increased his plant's efficiency by 14% this year. His scope is exactly where it needs to be." I did not raise my voice. I took a sip of my ice water, listening to the crackle of the wood fire, while my mother quickly changed the subject to Chloe's upcoming trip to Saint-Tropez. The third escalation occurred in the spring of 2025, when David and I decided to purchase our first home. It was a modest, 3-bedroom brick ranch house located in an older, tree-lined neighborhood 6 miles outside the country club gates. It required a down payment of $34,000. I asked my father for an advance on any inheritance or a simple loan from the family's secondary investment fund, offering to pay it back with 5% interest over 4 years. We sat in his home study, a room that smelled of old leather and furniture wax, with a large mahogany desk separating us. My father didn't open the folder of financial projections I had prepared. He simply slid it back across the leather blotter. "We don't fund compromise, Maya. If you were marrying someone from the Crestview legal circle, we would be discussing a proper estate on the ridge. I will not diminish our capital to secure a small brick box in a commercial district. It sets the wrong standard for the Lynn name." Chloe walked into the room without knocking, holding a sleek black shopping bag from an upscale boutique. She looked at my folder on the desk and chuckled. "Still begging for scraps, Maya? If you can't afford the down payment on a starter home, perhaps you should consider an apartment over by the interstate. The noise isn't that bad once you get used to it." I picked up my folder, smoothed the corner of the cardstock cover, and stood up. "The house has a structurally sound foundation, Chloe. That is more than can be said for most properties on the ridge. I walked out of the room, closing the heavy oak door behind me with a soft, controlled click. David and I used our own savings, adjusting our budget by cutting out all non-essential expenses for 6 months, and bought the house without a single cent of their assistance. The inciting act, the boundary line that could never be repaired, took place precisely 4 months before our engagement party. I was helping my mother clean out the vintage cedar chest in the attic to prepare for a historical society tour. At the bottom of the chest, wrapped in faded tissue paper inside an old blue velvet box, I found our grandmother's engagement ring. It was a stunning, 3-carat oval-cut cashmere sapphire surrounded by a halo of old mine-cut diamonds, valued at approximately $45,000. My grandfather had given it to her in 1960. Attached to the box was a small, yellowed index card written in my grandmother's delicate script. For Maya, who has her grandfather's quiet heart and steady hands. The note was dated August 14, 2018, 3 weeks before she passed away. I held the box in my palm, feeling the cool weight of the velvet. My mother turned around from a stack of vintage linens, saw what I was holding, and immediately snatched the box from my fingers. Her face was tight, her voice sharp as an autumn wind. "That is not for you, Maya. Your grandmother was senile when she wrote that note. This ring belongs to the eldest daughter of the primary household line. Chloe will be marrying a junior partner at a corporate firm next year, and she requires a piece of this caliber to match her position. You are marrying an engineer. A simple silver band will suit your lifestyle perfectly." Chloe stepped out from the attic stairs, having followed us up. She took the box from our mother's hand, opened it, and slid the sapphire onto her right ring finger. It fit perfectly. She held her hand up against the dusty sunlight coming through the small dormer window. "It really is beautiful, isn't it? It would be such a shame to waste something this historic on a small kitchen in a suburb. Thank you for understanding your place, Maya." I stood on the bare pine floorboards of the attic. The air smelled of old dust and decaying wool. My heart rate did not elevate. My breathing remained steady. I looked at my grandmother's ring on Chloe's finger, then looked into my mother's cold, transactional eyes. I realized then that they did not see me as a daughter or a sister. They saw me as a landscape feature to be managed. A secondary character, whose legal and emotional rights could be harvested to enhance Chloe's social capital. I didn't yell, I didn't reach for the ring. I simply adjusted the strap of my canvas purse over my shoulder, turned toward the stairs, and said, "The value of a stone depends entirely on the clarity of the light reflecting through it, Chloe. Enjoy the ring for now." I walked down the narrow wooden steps into the main house, left the keys to their front door on the marble kitchen island, and drove home to my small brick house. The breaking point arrived 3 days later, but it did not look like an explosion. David and I were sitting at our small oak dining table, eating a simple dinner of chicken broth and rice. He looked at me, reached into his pocket, and placed a small, velvet box on the table between us. Inside was a 3/4-carat solitaire diamond ring on a delicate platinum band. It was simple, clean, and completely paid for with his own overtime hours. "It isn't a 3-carat sapphire, Maya," David said, his voice quiet, his eyes steady and clear. "But it belongs to you." Completely. I took the ring out of the box, slid it onto my finger, and looked at the small, bright point of light reflecting off the kitchen pendant lamp. "It is perfect, David. It is exactly what I wanted." That evening at 9:00 p.m., my mother called. Her voice was brisk, filled with the logistics of her own social calendar. "Maya, since you and David are insistent on this arrangement, I have booked the small card room at the Rosewood Country Club for a brief engagement announcement next month. It will be a small cocktail hour for 50 people. I've already ordered a basic vegetable platter and house white wine. Please ensure David wears a proper tie." I looked down at the small diamond on my finger. I felt the cold, hard weight of a decision forming in my mind, a clear, logical framework clicking into place like a heavy brass lock. "No, Mother," I said, my voice completely flat. If we are going to do this, we will do it properly. I want the grand ballroom. I want the full dinner service for 150 guests. I want the Roederer estate champagne. My mother scoffed through the receiver. The grand ballroom costs $15,000 just for the evening rental, Maya. We are not spending that kind of capital on a minor announcement. You won't have to spend a single dime, Mother, I replied. I will cover the entire invoice myself, every dollar of it. Just send out the invitations to the full family registry, including grandfather. I will handle the venue. There was a long silence on the line. My mother's social instinct could not resist a grand event at someone else's expense. Very well, she said. If you wish to waste your small savings on a single evening of vanity, that is your choice. The invitations will go out tomorrow. I hung up the phone. I did not cry. I did not vent my frustration to David. I sat down at my laptop, opened a secure, encrypted database that I had been building for the last 3 years during my weekend visits to Maine, and began my countermove. David thought I was just visiting my grandfather to drink tea and watch the ocean. He didn't know that for 36 months. Arthur Lynn had been transferring the operational oversight of the Lynn family holding trust into a private corporate entity registered in the state of Delaware under the name Stonecrop Logistics. Advisors. My grandfather was 88 years old, but his mind was as sharp as a razor blade. He had watched my father manage his law firm's accounts, and he had watched my mother spend thousands of dollars on social vanity. And he had grown deeply concerned about the future of the enterprise he had built from a single cargo crane in 1965. During my weekend visits, we hadn't just talked about steel prices, we had reviewed the trust's structural vulnerabilities. My grandfather had appointed me as the sole managing partner of Stonecrop Logistics Advisors on my 24th birthday. A legal position that carried full power of attorney over the allocation of the family's primary real estate assets and the 500-acre Maine estate. The transition was entirely legal, fully documented by a top-tier corporate estate firm in Boston, and completely confidential. My parents and Chloe had no access to these corporate registries because they only monitored the local personal probate filings in Crestview Hills. They believed the $42 million trust was still governed by the old 1994 family will, which designated my father as the executor and Chloe as the primary residual beneficiary. They didn't know that the 1994 will now controlled an empty shell account containing exactly $14,200. The true wealth had already migrated to the company I managed. I spent the next 4 weeks working late into the night. I gathered every financial document, every property deed, and every corporate ledger relating to the Lynn family assets. I discovered that for the past 18 months, my father had been borrowing heavily against his anticipated executor status. Taking out 2 private bridge loans totaling $350,000 from a boutique local bank to fund Chloe's European trips and my mother's extensive home remodeling projects on Stonecrop Ridge. He had listed his future interest in the grandfather's Maine estate as the primary collateral for these loans, signed under a declaration of sole expectancy. It was a massive, unethical legal gamble that depended entirely on my grandfather passing away before the banknotes came due in the winter of 2026. I called my grandfather's corporate attorney, a precise, white-haired man named Thomas Vance, on November 4, 2025. We sat in his Boston office, surrounded by stacks of heavy legal volumes and the smell of old parchment. I placed my father's bridge loan documents on his desk. "He is leveraging assets he does not own, Thomas," I said, my voice steady and calm. "He has committed fraud against the bank by certifying himself as the sole heir to the Maine property." Thomas Vance adjusted his spectacles, reading through the loan certifications with a grim expression. "Your father has been reckless, Maya. If your grandfather revokes his personal status within the residual pool, the bank will accelerate these notes immediately." It will trigger a total foreclosure on his personal assets, including the house on Stonecrop Ridge. I know, I said. I want you to prepare the final execution documents for the Stonecrop Holding Trust. We will dissolve the remaining personal residual pool completely. Every acre of the main estate, every corporate share of Lynn Shipping, and the deeds to the secondary properties will be formally consolidated under Stonecrop Logistics Advisors. The transfer will take effect on the night of December 12. December 12 is the night of your engagement party, Maya, Thomas noted, looking up from the paperwork. I am aware, I replied. I want my grandfather to sign the final execution pages in person, at the Rosewood Country Club. I will have a notary public present at table 4. And what about your family's interest? They will receive exactly what they have contributed to the operational survival of the enterprise, I said. Which is nothing. The night of December 12 arrived. The grand ballroom at the Rosewood Country Club was a masterpiece of architectural vanity. The high ceilings were supported by white fluted columns, and the 15 circular tables were lit by tall silver candelabras that cast a warm, flickering glow over the faces of the 150 guests. My parents had arrived early, taking credit for the grandeur of the room despite not contributing a single dollar to the invoice. My mother wore a black velvet gown that smelled of expensive jasmine perfume, and my father stood near the main bar, drinking premium bourbon and laughing with his senior partners. Chloe was in the center of the room, wearing a striking emerald silk dress, her hand raised constantly so that the light would catch my grandmother's 3-carat sapphire ring. David and I sat at the head table. David looked calm and handsome in a simple charcoal suit, his hand resting quietly next to mine. My grandfather arrived at 8:30 p.m., escorted by Thomas Vance and a young woman carrying a leather document folio. He looked frail but immensely solid in his old tweed jacket, taking his seat at table 4 near the stage without speaking to my parents. My mother had tried to steer him toward the front row, but he had simply waved her away with a short, sharp motion of his cane. At 9:00 p.m., my father took the stage. He tapped his silver spoon against his champagne glass, the sharp chime drawing the attention of the entire room. The chatter died down, replaced by the soft rustle of silk as the guests turned toward the podium. "Good evening, everyone," my father said, his voice resonant with the practiced confidence of a veteran trial lawyer. "We are gathered tonight to recognize my younger daughter, Maya, as she embarks on her new journey with David. While we all know that Maya has chosen a path of quiet, modest boundaries, we are pleased to support her choices as a family. A stable home requires structure, and we are glad she has found something that suits her scope." A few polite claps echoed from the back tables. My father raised his glass toward us. "To Maya and David, may your small brick house be comfortable." I stood up from my seat, intending to walk to the stage to offer my response. But before I could reach the steps, Chloe stepped past me, her emerald silk dress rustling loudly. She took the microphone directly from our father's hand, a wide, predatory smile on her face. She looked out at the 150 guests, her eyes gleaming beneath the crystal chandeliers. "Thank you, Father," Chloe said, her voice amplified clearly through the ballroom speakers. "I think it is beautiful that we are celebrating Maya's little arrangement tonight. But since we have the entire extended family and our grandfather here in the ballroom, I believe it is the perfect moment to share an announcement that truly secures the future of our family's lineage." She paused, looking directly at me, her fingers twisting my grandmother's sapphire ring around her finger. "Look at this ring, everyone." It is a tiny, 3/4-carat speck of dust on Maya's hand, which makes sense because my sister has always been satisfied with leftovers and second place. But tonight, I need your attention on something that actually matters, because I am carrying the true future of this family's legacy. I am 12 weeks pregnant with the first grandson of the Lynn estate line. And as the primary heir to our grandfather's legacy, I wanted to share that the future of Stonecrop Ridge is officially secure. The ballroom fell into a stunned, breathless silence. My mother let out a small, ecstatic cry from the front table, her hands flying to her mouth. My father beamed, clapping his hands together loudly. The guests shifted uncomfortably, looking from Chloe's triumphant face down to where I stood at the base of the stage. It was a calculated, total ambush, a public erasure of my engagement celebration, designed to establish her ultimate financial and social dominance over my life in front of every witness that mattered to our community. I stood perfectly still at the bottom of the wooden steps. I did not drop my head. I did not look at the ground. I felt David's steady presence 2 feet behind me. I turned my eyes away from Chloe and looked toward table 4. My grandfather, Arthur Lynn, stood up. He did not use his cane. He walked slow and straight down the aisle, his heavy leather shoes making a dull, deliberate sound against the ballroom carpet. He reached the stage, climbed the steps, and took the microphone out of Chloe's hand with a single, unyielding pull. "Chloe," my grandfather said into the microphone, his deep, gravelly voice cutting through the room with the force of a shifting tectonic plate. "Your arrogance is exceeded only by your ignorance of reality." Chloe's triumphant smile vanished, her face freezing into a tight, pale mask beneath the stage lights. "Grandfather, I was just sharing the news of your future grandson." "You are sharing a fantasy," Arthur Lynn interrupted, his eyes locked onto her with a cold, absolute disdain. "You talk about your inheritance, you talk about the estate, and you wear my late wife's ring on your finger as if you earned it through vanity. The truth is, you own nothing. Your parents own nothing, and this unborn child will inherit exactly what your father has contributed to my life's work: empty air." The ballroom erupted into a low, frantic murmur. My father stepped forward, his face flushed red. "Arthur, please, this is a family celebration. You can't speak to Chloe this way in front of our partners." "Be silent, Richard," my grandfather said, turning his head slightly toward my father. "You have spent 18 months borrowing $350,000 against a property that does not belong to you. You certified yourself as my sole heir while I was still breathing, using my land as collateral to fund your wife's kitchen renovations and your eldest daughter's vacations. That is not legacy, Richard. That is theft." My father went completely white, his hands dropping to his sides, his mouth opening slightly but no sound coming out. My mother sat frozen in her chair, her velvet gown suddenly looking like a shroud, as the guests at the surrounding tables turned to stare at them in absolute horror. My grandfather turned back to the audience, reaching into his tweed jacket pocket to pull out a single sheet of heavy white paper bearing the seal of Stonecrop Logistics Advisors. At 5:00 p.m. this evening, the Lynn Family Holding Trust was formally dissolved. Every asset, every acre of the main property, every share of Lynn Shipping, and the deeds to the secondary properties have been consolidated into a private corporate advisorship. The sole managing partner of that corporation, holding full power of attorney and absolute ownership over the estate, is my younger daughter, Maya. He looked down from the stage, his eyes finding mine in the crowd. A small, rare smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Maya has managed the logistics of my shipping routes for 3 years while you were busy selecting linens. She understands that the world is built by the people who move the cargo. The house on Stonecrop Ridge belongs to her company now, Richard. Your bridge loans are accelerated as of midnight tonight because your collateral has ceased to exist." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute, broken only by the sharp, rhythmic sound of my mother's crystal champagne glass slipping from her fingers and shattering against the hardwood floor. I walked up the steps of the stage, my navy silk dress moving smoothly with my stride. I stood beside my grandfather, looking down at my sister, whose hand was trembling so violently that she had to grip her own wrist to hide it. "The speck of dust on my finger is completely paid for, Chloe," I said, my voice clear, calm, and perfectly audible through the ballroom speakers. "You can keep our grandmother's sapphire ring for the next 30 days to help cover the deposit on that apartment by the interstate. Your lease on Stonecrop Ridge expires on the 1st of the month. I turned, took David's arm, and walked down the center aisle of the ballroom, leaving the three of them standing beneath the crystal chandeliers, while the notary public at table 4 began stamping the final foreclosure notifications. The aftermath was a swift, mathematical dismantling of the family dynamic. My father's bank accelerated the $350,000 bridge notes within 48 hours of the gala, citing a total failure of the certified collateral. Because his personal investment portfolios had been depleted by my mother's lifestyle expenses, he could not meet the margin call. Stonecrop Logistics Advisors executed its priority lien on the Stonecrop Ridge Manor, taking legal possession of the property on January 14, 2026. My parents were forced to downsize, moving into a small, rented 2-bedroom condo in a commercial district 12 miles outside the city gates. Funded entirely by my father's remaining salary from his law firm, which had been significantly reduced after his partners learned of his ethical misconduct regarding the estate. Chloe's fiancé broke off their engagement 3 weeks after the party, realizing that the massive inheritance he had factored into his career plan did not exist. She moved into a small, rented apartment above a commercial dry cleaner's shop on the south side of town. She called me once, on a cold Tuesday afternoon in February. Her voice was completely stripped of its arrogance, sounding thin, dry, and hollow through the phone line. She spent 20 minutes crying, begging me to let her move into the guest cottage on the main estate, telling me that the noise of the dry cleaner's exhaust fans kept her awake at night, and that she couldn't raise her child in a commercial zone. I sat at my mahogany desk in the main manor house, looking out the window at the dark gray ocean hitting the pine trees along the coast. The air in the room smelled of wood smoke and peppermint drops. "I accept the reality of your situation, Chloe," I said, my voice entirely even and restrained. "But my corporate properties are allocated based on operational utility, not emotional convenience. You should have considered the quality of your foundation before you attempted to build a legacy on my erasure." I hung up the phone and blocked her number. Her distress was no longer a variable in my ledger. It had ceased to matter. David and I still live in our small brick house outside the gates by our own choice. We like the foundation. We like the way the morning light hits the small kitchen island where we drink our coffee before we go to work. The 500-acre main estate is managed as a private nature preserve and corporate retreat for Lynn Shipping. And the Georgian Manor on Stonecrop Ridge has been leased to a local historical preservation society for a substantial monthly return. I lost the illusion of a family that loved me for who I was, and I lost 26 years of my life to a ranking system that treated my quietness as a structural flaw. But what I gained was the absolute ownership of my own reality. I gained a partnership with a man who sees my worth in the small, bright moments, and I gained an enterprise that honors the precision of my mind. I now understand that a true legacy is not inherited through the arrogance of a birthright or the public display of a stolen ring. It is earned in the quiet spaces, in the data, in the unyielding strength of the foundations we build for ourselves when no one is watching. Chloe thought I was a secondary character because I didn't hold the microphone. She forgot that the person who manages the cargo always dictates the destination of the ship. My name is Maya Lin. I am the managing partner of this family's future, and your account is formally closed.